and 0. Hi, everyone. The Fitch-Rona EMS commission meeting for July 21st is called to order at 7:05. I can't tell who's there. Is Michelle there to take roll or?
I am.
Yes. Could you take roll, please?
I sure can. Strassman,
Here.
Hilla,
Here.
Roberts,
Here.
Cronin,
Present.
Johnson,
Here.
Kaiser McHenry,
Here.
Lonsdorf,
Here.
Schnapp,
Here.
Lugenbull, Anderson,
Here.
and Dostalek.
Thank you. We have a quorum. Was there any interest in public comments? Did we get any?
I did not have any public comments.
Okay, then we will move on to a presentation of the 2022 financial audit by Johnson Block. And I would introduce the person, but I'm not there, so I don't know your name.
Brett Hoffmeister.
Hi, welcome, Brett.
Thank you. All right, so my name is Brett Hoffmeister. I'm from Johnson Block and Company. Tonight I'm going to be going over a brief presentation on the audit of the 2021 financial statements, which Michelle handed out this packet quick. This is just a summary report. There's also, we've issued the full audit already, so I think there's copies of that available. But I'm just going to go through this. If you have any questions on this or the detailed, the full audit report and financial statements, just let me know. I'd be happy to go over it. But I'm just going to kind of go over a brief presentation so I can get out of your hair and you guys can keep your meeting moving. So on this, the first page I'm going to go over is just a 2021 audit overview, and this just kind of gives a brief summary of what's in the report, the financial statements that accompany our audit report. But when you open up the bound document or the final PDF, since we don't really send out many bound documents anymore, you'll see our audit report's the first thing. So that gives some information on the period under audit. So this year was 12/31/2021. What financial statements and information are included in that opinion, and gives our actual opinion on the financial statements. Looks a little different than prior years just from changes in auditing standards, so it's just kind of an updated report. Our opinion on the 2021 financial statements was unmodified, meaning that everything was in accordance with GAAP as far as our audit work showed us. So that's the highest level of assurance we can give in an audit, and that's what you'd want to see. You'd expect to see that. A clean opinion is another way to state it. The other information here is just kind of what financial statements and information that opinion covers. It covers your government-wide financial statements, which are your full accrual statements, your fund financial statements, which are more on the budgetary basis that you do year to year, so that's what I'll focus on here. There's a set of notes to financial statements and then some required supplementary information that accompanies that. But that's all pretty standard for municipalities, governments, EMS districts, so that's all pretty standard there. Pages 1 and 2 after that are really all I'm going to talk about, just to kind of go over some financial highlights for the year. The rest of the information in this packet is just kind of historical information, year over year data. But so for 2021, on this first page, we've got kind of the whole set of financial statements condensed into one page. We've got your balance sheet, some fund balance information, and then a quick budget to actual. Looking at the balance sheet, total assets were about $1.1 million for 2021, up about $100,000 over 2020. Most of that increase is due to an increase in your accounts receivable. So those are your run fee receivables shown net of an allowance for uncollectible amounts. That's pretty common. That's what you see usually with EMS districts. You expect to see that net of an allowance. Just the nature of the business, you're not going to collect everything that you bill out for run fees. The other major asset is cash, about $565,000 there. Down a little bit, but that's just kind of cash flow fluctuation. Year to year mainly went down because of the increase in receivables. Liabilities, deferred inflows, and fund balances. Total liabilities were about $118,000. Most of that was accrued liabilities related to payroll, so your December WRS payable, and then your payroll earned in 21 that it wasn't paid till 22. That's all pretty standard. The deferred inflows of resources are your unavailable run revenue, about 184,000. That's basically just a revenue deferral from 2021 runs that can't be shown as revenue until 2022. That's just kind of a quirk of governmental accounting. If you don't collect those fees within 60 days of year end, you don't show the revenue until that money is collected. So that's just a timing difference there. That'll be shown as revenue once it's collected this year. And the remainder of about 787,000 is fund balance. So that's your total fund balance at the end of the year. Split up into several different categories. The main one we like to look at, when we get the question, how are we doing? One of the things we like to look at is your unassigned fund balance at the end of the year, because your unassigned is your fund balance that's available to meet your operational needs. Fund balance at the end of the year that was unassigned is about 424,000. And when we look at that, one of the metrics we look at is what is that as a percent of your budget? And for Fitch-Rona, we just look at your operating budget. We don't include the capital budget when we look at that because that's usually separate assessments. But your unassigned fund balance is about 13% of your 2022 budget. Generally, we recommend that be 15, 20%, somewhere in that range. So it's a little light. Did improve year over year. It went up from 12% to 13%. So I don't think there's any, cause for alarm there yet, but it is a little tight from what we would typically recommend. And that's usually we recommend you have some in fund balance just for cash flow needs in case there's, emergency repairs or you have to purchase a whole new vehicle unexpectedly because of some, unexpected loss, accident, anything like that, where you're down for an extended period and would need to do something there. But just to help have some reserve there in case of unexpected need is essentially what we recommend that for. And then looking at the summarized income statement, we just did a quick budget to actual. This does include the capital activity, so that's why the budget numbers look a little different. Budget for both revenues and expenses was just under 3.7 million. Both cases came in over budget. On the revenue side, you had extra fees in 2021 due to COVID clinics. There was a couple $100,000 in extra revenue there. With that extra revenue came extra payroll expenses. That was the primary driver in the increase there. More wage costs, more benefit costs, taxes, all that good stuff. Just because of that increased need for staffing. So overall, you had an increase of about $20,000 in fund balance, but your unassigned fund balance itself went up about $50,000. So even though total you only went up about 20, your unassigned fund balance went up a good clip more than that, and that's just kind of classification. And other activity can affect that unassigned number, which you can see a little bit more on page 2. We give a detail of your fund balance by class. And here you see it goes from least liquid to most liquid. So your non-spendable is made up of prepaids and inventories. Essentially, that's when you have items on your balance sheet that you can't really use inventories or prepaids to pay off a current liability, like pay a bill, pay your payroll. So we show that as non-spendable because it can't be used to meet those obligations. Restricted has to be used usually for set aside by state statute, or a grant agreement has to be used for a specific purpose. The EMS funding assistance program money is training, equipment, that type of thing. The assigned amounts are amounts the commission has set aside itself, so those amounts can be used for other purposes, but you've earmarked those. The employee benefits is the largest thing. That's to pay sick leave when employees retire, that sick leave payout that would have to go out to them. And then the remainder is unassigned. So overall, audit went, we were a little delayed this year, but as far as the audit financial statements go, everything looked good. No major concerns with internal controls or other issues that we think we would need to report. The only thing I think the one thing to note is fund balance is a little tight, but I think you're in a good position to be able to make that up over the next couple of years. So, any questions on either this information here, information in the audit financial statements themselves?
You mentioned benchmark guidance for the fund balance as a percent of. Is there anything else that you could kind of give us some benchmark guidance that you see in here, like when you see other EMS districts?
Like as far as anything specific, or just compared to other districts?
Yeah, compared to other.
I mean, From what I've seen, your collections, they're pretty similar to what I've seen in other EMS districts. Like, there's actually a chart on the last page that shows like your accounts receivable as a percent of gross revenue, your allowance as a percentage of your AR, just kind of looking at those to see the trends. Pretty similar to what I've seen in other ones. The allowance, the bad debts are all kind of creeping up. As the population ages, you're able to collect less and less through, when you're using Medicare or Medicaid billings, that collection percentage isn't as good. So nothing out of the ordinary from what I've seen at other EMS districts.
Thank
Or
you.
like nothing that's way out of sync with what I would expect to see.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, thank you very much. A good presentation.
All right, thank you.
I did send out the complete audit when we got that the end of probably May, sometime a while ago, probably the end of May. If somebody needs that again, please let me know and I can send that out to you. I've got a couple of paper copies as well if you don't want to use your own paper at home. We can get you the paper copy.
And if there are any questions that come up, just let us know. We'd be happy to address those as they come up. So.
Okay, let's move on to review and approval of the meeting minutes from June 23rd. Everybody get a chance to look at them. Any corrections, comments? If not, entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Thank you. And who made the second? Thank
Strassman.
you. All in favor of approving the minutes as submitted, signify by saying aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? If not, the minutes as submitted for June 23rd are approved. We'll move on to the chief's report. Patrick, it's all yours.
Sure, it's the stuff that you routinely see every month. We're a little bit down with call volume last month, so it's like down 4%, but as you can see, that number is still 370 calls. So we're still running pretty good. Something new, and that'll project it up to 4,200 calls, which is what we're looking at towards the end of the month anyway. Something new I actually did start putting on there this month. Again, the rest of the information you can kind of look at, but you'll see underneath the special reporting, when we talk below the Narcan and our response car responses, I put the outer resources line on there. So this is something we'll start kind of tracking, and I don't have 2021 numbers because this is actually a fairly labor-intensive number to get. There's no really good reporting system to get it, but as we went and looked at that third truck, it said, what is our capacity, right? How many calls are we missing? How many times does somebody have to come into our district and help us out? So kind of the number to look at, a year-to-date thing. I'll start with the bottom one first. So mutual aid required year-to-date 5 times since January of this year. And this goes through the end of June. So in the first 6 months of the year, 5 times all of our ambulances were out, and some other municipality had to come respond into our district to take our calls. I don't have, it's buried farther in the report. I don't report it specifically by municipalities, but it tends to be more in Fitchburg, right? Because we have more calls there, but Verona is not isolated. It actually does occur in the city of Verona as well. So 5 times in 6 months is not horrible, right? We're actually, I'd love to put an ambulance on everybody's corner and be 5 minutes away from everybody's house, but it's not going to happen. So that is a good number to start to watch as we start looking at, do we need another ambulance? The number to really kind of watch, though we only had to have ambulances come in 5 times, in just the month of June alone, there were 23 times where all 3 ambulances were out and we just didn't get another call in our district. And that's only in 1 month. So we'll go back and I'll start reporting this number, and I'll see if I can pull some 2021 numbers for some comparison. All the trucks being out at the same time is a little bit easier to look up. that one actually is a solid report, just says all three at one. And now that doesn't mean that as long as there's 1 minute of overlap, it says all the trucks are out. Right, so there could be a time where somebody was clearing something, somebody was back in district for 1 minute, says all three trucks are out. The number in the bottom, I actually have to go in and look up every single call for another unit that comes into our district. Because if you remember, we have a thing called auto aid, which means they just send the closest ambulance. So City of Madison Medic 6 on Badger is much closer than any of our ambulances to Greenway Cross, Coho, Pike Drive, Index Road. So if a very high acuity call, there's those specifically coded in the 911 system. We initially get paged to that, but then when they finally figure out what is going on and figure out what that's called a code determinant is, it reconfigures it and says, is there somebody closer? And that unit is then actually sent. So that, and I've got what that number is, but that's actually a significant number, more than 5. I think that's upwards probably about 10 or 15 times. We have had other units come in, but it's because they are closer than our own ambulances. So that is something we can actually look, and again, I kept it by municipality. I can go find where that location is armed. Probably 9 out of 10 times, it is the Index Road, Coho. It is the northern part of the Fitchburg district that is just that much closer to City Medic 6. It does occur occasionally in the northern part of Verona, where Medic 7 comes right off of McKenna Boulevard. Again, that's a number there, but those are 2 numbers I want to start sharing as we kind of start looking and see, what we need to do to potentially expand as we're missing calls. Perspective-wise, before we added that third station, it was happening 4 to 5 times a month. I actually did pull that number for Wanakee the other day. Chief Merland did actually report that up as we moved into that 4th ambulance. It was as few as 1, it was as many times as 9, where both of our ambulances were out and another district had to come in. So 5 times in 6 months is not anywhere near the 5 times a month it was happening before we added our 3rd ambulance. Any questions on that number?
In the column to the right of that, runs by municipality, it shows that we're making a lot of runs to the City of Madison, Town of Madison, Belleville, and Mount Horeb. Are those mutual aid where we're going to help them? Because there's quite a bit more of them than there are of other people coming to help us.
So the Belleville and Mount Horeb, I can separate them up. Most of the time, those are assistance. So that's a paramedic intercept. Yes, or an automatic paramedic aid. So they are responding. They are not out of resources. We are going to provide a higher level of care most of the time, vast majority of the time. The calls into the City of Madison, again, the vast majority of the time is we are closer than they are. So if you can think of, the Medic 6, when it's in quarters, is closer to us, to our northern part of our Fitchburg. If they're out of quarters, we are significantly closer into that northern part of Madison. There's a handful of times, too, once you're on air, if you're coming back from the hospital, you're driving down Park Street and something happens to block off of Park Street, you get tagged, right? They're closer to that. So we actually do get a handful of times a year where everybody's out. I believe the farthest we've actually gotten tagged was Dean Clinic on Stoughton Road, where we were the closest paramedic ambulance because everybody else was out. So that the city call, most of the calls in the city and the town of Madison are those. Not that they're out of resources, though it does happen. There are times where the city of Madison has all 8 ambulances out, I think, 8 or 9 ambulances out. It's pretty uncommon, like we do, but it does actually happen. The other information you see in there is the stuff I just report out every month. Normally, for our consortium training this month, we actually did a review on monkeypox and other infectious diseases, since that's kind of the hot topic. And then for our department training, we actually, every 2 years, we do have our providers go through a driving course. The county, shout out to them, the county EMS office actually still does come out. They set that up for us. Epic graciously lets us use one of their parking lots. Goes out and sets up a cone course, and they have to go drive through obstacles. They said one of these years we're going to throw out children and rocks and stuff that they, garage doors, things that they kind of bump into. But so they did actually do the driving course. That was actually just this last Tuesday. And then we actually also have an online portion where it does a really good review on the use of lights and sirens and driving with due regard. Up and running full speed with events. The rest of the information you'll see here, like you normally see about our data. Financial stuff, Brent just talked to you kind of the year-end stuff, but this is our monthly report, sitting where it normally is. The biggest changing in checking in the money market, why that was so big in that 1 month change, it was actually June was a three-month pay period based on the way that Thursdays fell. So that's abnormally high. Other stuff that's on there is pretty much unchanged. We did get a $50 donation from Once Upon a Time Childcare in Verona. The fire department and us went out there and played with children and gave them some coloring books, and they actually gave us a donation for the time that we spent out there, so a thank you to them. Milestones you'll see out there as well. I got Dale at 24 years. Otherwise, Gary hits his 21 years. And then the other ones trickle down there. July is when we implemented that third ambulance 3 years ago now already, in 2019. So those 7 people will hit their anniversary date this month. Jeff was commenting that on earlier, I think it was earlier today, it was 3 years ago, actually today, when those 7 new employees started for a week and a half before we went live on August 1st. So it's kind of a anniversary date for them. Other stuff before I'll pull up the current financial status that I've got to share. The negotiations team, there was a little bit of a hang up on the 311 side of things with the changeover in leadership, getting a representative from 311 at our first meeting. So we still have not met with them. August 24th, it's a Wednesday, I think. So August 24th is our first meeting with the exchanging of contracts, and we do actually have a second meeting set up 2 weeks after that. One would like to think it's going to be done in 2 meetings, right? It's not, but our exchange will be the 24th, and essentially the next meeting on September 7th will be kind of that first true negotiations back and forth meeting. So those dates are out there and kind of locked in. I think I shared last month, we looked at hiring some more LTEs and some volunteer EMTs. We talked about the volunteer EMT thing a couple months ago. We actually just wrapped that interview process up last week and are sent out some conditional hiring offers today. They still have to go through the drug testing of the physical test, as well as we do background checks and driver abstracts on them. So those are all part of the conditional part, but so we added 4 LTEs to our pool, as well as we added 5 EMTs that we're going to try to integrate into kind of most of them expressed an interest in going to paramedic school. So we'll get them onboarded and hopefully start kind of home growing our own LTE pool. Last note that I had down here is we received, I didn't know it was coming, we did get our FAP funds, so that funding assistance program that comes from the state. We did get that check. Was the end of last week. It was the same amount that we got last year. Part of that, again, they have to be spent on those certain silos of stuff. But with that, we actually got a second check. That's part of the ARPA funds. I wrote it down because I couldn't remember what it was. The American Rescue Plan Act funds, kind of the back to normal funds. So we got half of it now. We will get the other half next spring. But as an EMS district, we'll get a check for $24,000. For the ARPA funds. That'll come from the state. Again, half of it now, the other half I think comes in February. So the guideline with that, we do have to report what we spend it on. They were given, the parameters we were given with that funding is it has to be used in the same format or on the same things that we would normally use FAP funding for. So outside of the training restrictions that some of the FAP money is for, so essentially that can be used on equipment. It can be used on training equipment and some can't be disposable supplies. It can only supplement a budget. It cannot replace a budget item. So again, I didn't even know it was coming. I don't know if I just wasn't paying attention or I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth, right? So Jeff and I have been looking at that and seeing what exactly we can do to kind of start probably some replacing equipment here as we talk about, that next ambulance and some of the things that need to go into that and the challenges that CIP, process may present. So we're kind of looking at where to best use that money to help kind of replace some of the stuff in the future. Any questions specifically on those funds or that?
Yeah, this is Sue.
Yeah.
On your last one, wondering what to do with the funds. I know, we had a lot of supply issues and I know that you can't buy disposable items, but where are we with, they don't call peppers or disposable, right? Do you have all the peppers you need for the amount of staff you have and for the new trucks?
We do. We have 2 on every frontline ambulance now, plus an additional 2. We had 1 in each one of our response cars. So district-wide, whatever that works, 6, 7, we have a total of 8 of them. So that would actually put 1 on that new ambulance in 2 years as well. Jeff and I each had 1 on our vehicle, so we do. But that is absolutely something we could consider. One of the things a couple of the things we've been talking about is radios, because as we've been replacing radios with ambulances, the lead time on radios is currently somewhere between 6 months to a year. So we could currently replace those in our current ambulances and then actually just move them into the new ambulances. Radios are $5,000 to $6,000. The mobile one that goes in the ambulance, the portable ones are about $6,000 to $7,000, and we will actually need some more of those. Right now, every ambulance we have currently has 2 of them in them, plus we have some of the older ones in our response cars. So we can easily, I always feel like we never have enough radios. So that's an option we looked at, as well as maybe replacing our oldest cot, in which case then we could continue to use that in a new ambulance as well. So those are the 2 things we threw out, but yes, so the long answer to your short question, we are actually sitting pretty good on peppers.
I just know that our infectious disease, sure, COVID's maybe going to end. I doubt it, but now monkeypox is here. I think that that's just something that it's always going to be. It's going to be part of our everyday workflow now.
They are still available. It's pretty rare that anyone uses them, but we do still have a solid supply of filters and hoods. So we're pretty good on them. Just got to continue to cycle the batteries through that so that they don't all die, because they don't get used a lot anymore. So we just got to maintain the batteries. Any other questions? So then the other document I'll share is that kind of 6-month check-in for our in-house budget. So we're 49.6% through the year. You'll see, as Brent had kind of mentioned, we're actually still a little bit over the expected run income for the year. So we're about 57% of where we were at. So targeting a better, higher amount of expected income. We're at 50% of the cities giving their money. Michelle, have we gotten our funds from all 3 municipalities?
One of Verona. That's the only one we're waiting on.
Anybody want to follow up on that? So we have gotten our checks.
Or is it a monthly check or a?
No,
It's the semi-annual
Semi-annual.
check. Mhm.
I'm sure it's in the mail.
Yeah, it's in the mail. I'm more than happy to come pick it up. As anticipated, our interest is way down, but otherwise you can see the rest of the information that's there. Brent had kind of mentioned as well, we talked about the regular budget, and I'll present it again here, but the unscheduled overtime, as you can see, we're not way over, but we are over. If you remember, we did do the COVID clinic at the beginning of the year, support for that. So that's that unscheduled or scheduled overtime. Sometimes it's never really clear. So, I mean, though we separate the 2 pots, they kind of go together, because it's hard to differentiate based on who's working it. But that's going to be a little bit over because we did the extra, because it still comes out of salary, even though technically it gets reimbursed. So those are always over. You'll see the sick time over cap. That's actually just a projected way over, because we did have the payout for Kyle leaving. So that is the line item that it comes out of. That's why you see that at 226% over. The regular line, I mean, the budget line item itself is within the budget. It just has to get paid out in that line item. the other stuff you'll see there, we've made our second part of the year payments to Verona for the administrative space we use. So our total expenses are at 50.2% of the year versus at 49, and we're at 49.6% through the year. So we kind of know already we were going to be over in fuel and medical supplies and those costs. So any questions on kind of where we're at in the current budget year? I think hopefully this run income continues to kind of drive in. It's the kudos to our, staff. The higher run income means they're doing more calls. So that I think will actually, as Brent talked about, the reserve of bringing that back up to the 15%. I'm hoping this will make a pretty good impact in that and creep that up. So any other questions for me? I'm going to throw it back to Terry.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you, Patrick. Let's move on. Both subcommittees met, so if we do a report from the personnel subcommittee, Derek?
Sure. We did meet on July 14, and we discussed the two items listed here. I also noticed that, the next step was for the Finance Committee to discuss. So I'm not sure, Chief, would you like to kind of give the background in these two items? How would you like to move forward on these, or should we mutually report?
Sure. Well, what I can do is kind of give you I think it was half and half of the group, but I'll give you kind of the overview. Those two items are kind of tied together. So I'll just do, just so everybody's aware of what the two groups talked about. And then we'll talk probably both of those together. So in January of this year, the staff approached me. We had a staff meeting. The staff approached me about mandates. So as you can imagine, we have to keep all of our ambulances on the street. So that means somebody's got to come to work. So when we have a short-term opening, that's usually less than a 24-hour opening, and somebody calls in sick, or for whatever reason that is, most of the time it's they're calling in sick. We don't want them on the truck. Somebody's got to come to work. So we have an SOP on how to fill that shift. We usually blast it out digitally, electronically. Usually goes out to our LTE staff first. They get a crack at it. We give it about 15 minutes. We blast it out again to our LTs and our full-time staff, let them know that opening is in there. If nobody picks that up, then we actually have a process. It is actually defined in their labor contract that somebody needs to work, and that's kind of based on seniority, and again, it's an established SOP. Challenge, if I go back a few years, historically it was out at some points of it. Somebody was getting mandated about every 8 months. I think at one point it was out there about every year. Our current callback is about every 3 to 4 months. So in the big year, it happens about 50 times a year. So of the thousands of shifts we have a year, about 50 times a year, somebody has to come and work. So, it's either me giving them a phone call or me knocking on their door at 6 o'clock in the morning saying, guess who gets to come to work today or stay at work today. So it's pretty disruptive, right? It doesn't happen a lot, each employee. It's about twice a year. It's disruptive to your life, right? You have to stay at work, but somebody's got to stay at work. So they brought it up as that number has gone up over the last year or 2 years as we've, of course, added that third ambulance and 7 more people. That number is going to go up. They brought it up as a concern of how do we try to, nip that in the bud and keep that number lower and not disrupt their lives. So they put together a work group, a handful of employees. There was, I think, 6 of them. I did share that work group results with you. And then in May, they surveyed all the LTE staff. They surveyed the full-time staff, came back and said, we have some recommendations that we would like to see potentially implemented to reduce the amount of overtime, or the mandates, not overtime, mandates. A couple of those were easy fixes. One of those was actually to allow more time for callback. So we actually did change the SOP that we use to call people back, as opposed to that half an hour we were doing it before. As long as it's not 2 a.m, we extended that out for about 2 hours to allow people to give them more time to sign up, right? They're out for a run, or exercising, or working at another job. Maybe they didn't see it within half an hour. We give them the opportunity to come back. So we started that actually right away. We are tracking to see whether or not that does make a difference as one of their recommendations. Second thing we actually did as well to one of their recommendations, one of our scheduling softwares, we just used that to blast it out for notifications. We use that software, so does about a dozen other agencies in the county. So they were kind of telling me that most of our part-time staff were ignoring it because they got so many blasts. We do have a secondary system that we use for messaging. So we actually now, when there's an opening, we use both systems. So they actually can pay attention to that second system as well. A little bit more work on our side to blast it out via two different systems, but not hugely disruptive. So we implemented both of those right away. Other suggestions they had were two of the things you'll see here that you talked about. The first one on there, they presented a proposal that for full-timers only and less than a 24-hour, with a shift that is open less than 24 hours, that they have the potential to earn comp time at that. So they could earn comp time as opposed to when they are mandated, they earn double time. That's contractual. So their proposal was at less than 24 hours notice, they could earn time and a half, or at time and a half, they could accrue comp time. They did propose a cap on that. They proposed that it be used within a handful of parameters on vacation time, but they did propose the use of comp time for that. So that was the MOU we discussed. I did put that together. I sent it to legal. We talked about it in the smaller groups. Because it is an earned benefit, it does have to be an MOU because it has contractual implications. So that's the big picture of what we talked about. The other one would be I'll just give you the heads up on the pay increase, and we can talk about you can share what each one of the groups talked about. The pay increase for LTEs. One of the things that the LTE survey came back and said was that potentially people with childcare issues, when we bring them in at that LTE wage, that it actually didn't, the cost benefit wasn't there for them to send a child to childcare because they weren't earning enough to pay for childcare to come in and work. So one of the recommendations was that we offer time and a half to our LTEs to come in when it's less than a 24-hour notification. So went back and historically pulled some data, said over the last 2 years, plus the first, I think it was about 5 months of this year, and looked and said, with a less than 24-hour notice, our LTEs only about 20% of the time our LTEs actually will pick those up. The other 80% of the time are the full-timers end up picking that shift up. And that is actually goes back a long time. That's actually how we prepare our budget, with that expectation of what it's going to cost us for overtime shifts and short notice shifts based on a 5-year average. So I went back and looked and kind of objectified it and said, what does that increase have to be? Because now, normally 20% of the time I already had LTEs picking up. Now I am still paying them. Now I am paying them more for something they would have done already. So we have to pay everybody that time and a half. So incentivizing in LTEs to pick up more shifts, there is a number, so they have to increase that 20%. They have to actually double that. So we have to go from a 20% LTEs picking up to about 30% of the LTEs picking that up to make it cost effective. Even with that, even at time and a half for an LTE, it's still cheaper than the double time I have to pay a full timer. So that was their proposal as well, that we essentially trial both of these things to see if it's making a difference. I guess I can toss it back to the subcommittee chairs to talk about what you decided as a group.
Regarding the first topic, the MOU for the comp time, the Personnel Committee felt that in light of the ongoing contract negotiations, not a good time to be addressing that we would look at that at a later time. And then regarding the pay increase for LTE short notice, our suggestion was seems like it's potentially a good idea to try it out for 6 months. So till the end of the year, and then address it. Is it a permanent change, or do we make another design change? That was the suggestion.
And oddly enough, the Finance Committee decided exactly the same thing. We thought the MOU ought to be part of the contract negotiations, and then the short notice coverage trial should just be through the end of the year. Same thing.
Is there any other discussion or guidance or questions? hearing the decision on the MOU, and I will share that with, so Greg Bailey was the kind of the head, Jeff was the chair of that committee, but Greg kind of was taking some of the lead on that as far as the staff wise. So I will make sure that I get back and share with him on the MOU result. And then we'll draft something as far as the pay increase. That'll probably have to be a policy change. I think we'll kind of dig and see where that is actually dictated in there, to figure out how to actually kind of put that in writing and what that expectation is and define what those parameters are. LTEs already make time and a half if they work more than 40 hours a week, just like our current staff do. So that they can't essentially stack that. So if they work 48 hours a week or pick up 2 shifts and then they pick up a short notice on Saturday, they don't get the time and a half of the time and a half. That is already, I don't know if we're going to call it premium pay or whatever it is. That will be addressed in kind of that policy change or whatever it turns into. So we'll take care of that. Was any other questions on those 2 topics? We didn't get to the finance. We spent some time with the finance committee just before this, and as usual, we kind of ran out of time to do the budget presentation. So I will pop that up there right now and share that with you. They did see let me do this first. Oops. They did see I did present it to them last month. So they saw it last month, and then that's when we came back to the meeting last month and said there was a little bit of a hiccup on the numbers in there that we did go back and fix. So we didn't review it, but I'll share it with you this month. So I did also put together I will pop it up on the screen here. I put together a summary of the essentially of the significant changes to kind of do the highlight of what you'll see in the budget. Other thing I added in here was our 2023 priorities. So as we kind of started to look at all those different line items in there, it was kind of shared with me to not take the approach of what do we need to cut, but where are our priorities as far as spending goes. As everyone's very aware of the impact of the economy. So I just picked the top 4 priorities of what we need to look at as the budget, where those expenditures should be made. First one is always going to be, if we keep our staff supported, our staff is going to do a good job. So that first one in there is to support that cost of living increase for our staff. We are, as has been mentioned, we currently are in a negotiation year. So it was just kind of a best guess of what may happen as far as when we included that number in the salaries. So that salary is truly a best guess as far as presenting our budget. I just gave you the dates for negotiations. We're not going to have a contract in place before the budgets are due to the municipalities. So similar to what the municipalities do, right? They do a best guess of what that wage increase would be. That's what is built into the budget. It may be a little bit more, it may be less. But that was the number 1 priority is maintaining, supporting our staff. Second one is as we continue operationally wise, right, it's keeping trucks on the streets and ambulances filled with supplies. So a huge increase in cost of fuel and vehicle maintenance as well as medical supplies. So that's the second thing. And you're going to see that's where that other really big increase came from. We've talked about, the rising cost of gloves alone for a while. So that, to me, that was the budget, right? We gotta keep things in service. The other 2 things that I put in there, it's been talked about. So the last 2 years, that 3rd year of the paramedic internship for the fire department, that they spend the first 2 years in there. The 3rd year, we pay for up to half of their tuition. That came out of the last 2 years to help offset, just kind of keep that budget lower. So one of the priorities is the ask was to put that back in. As we kind of discuss about staffing issues that are continuing to occur, how do we continue to, help put more qualified people in that intern pool? We can help with that by supporting those fire interns. So to put that back in there, and then as Brent had shared with you, start the process to return the reserves to the required 15 to 25%. That's in the intergovernmental agreement that we be at. So you'll see a new line item in there. So just a really kind of the down and dirty then where you're going to see those big increases. So when we start at the top of that salary wage up there, does anybody need a copy? I did actually print out some paper copies if you want one while we're going through it. Okay. So at the very top of right, that income, because we did increase base rates in 2022, as this discussion, I think it was October, November of last year, we did see there is that little bit of a switch putting a little bit more onus on service fees versus the taxpayer. So we did actually switch that now, even based on this projection, those raised rates plus another little bit of increase in run revenue. We're back to about 47% municipal support and about 53% based on and about 53% based on run volume. So that overall brings our estimated run income up by about 3%. Other thing that you'll see in there is a line item, as Brent had said, right, we continually, when the auditors come in and say, oh, we're going over our salary lines every year, that's to be expected, because I just explained, right, when we go up to the Alliant Energy Center and do all of those events, those line items, that money comes out of the payroll line item, even though it's reimbursed on the other end. So what we actually did then is actually increased, based on kind of the historical perspective of what we have billed to the Alliant Energy Center and some of those events. We put that in the salary line item, so that's why you'll see that salary line item go up, but we also offset that by anticipated income from there. So you'll see an income line from special events that's significantly higher than we've ever put in there before, but that same number was actually also put into the salary line item. So it is a wash. If we would ultimately pull out of the Alliant Energy Center or not get any more events in there, we wouldn't ever get that money in. We also wouldn't spend it. So that's what that is. We talked about contract negotiations, did increase LTE wages. So we were at 2050, which our biggest comparison, we look at Sun Prairie, Middleton, Deer Grove, and a couple, that's pretty much the agencies we look at. We were on the lower end of where those wages were, as we're all fighting for that same group of LTEs. So the last 2 years, we were at $20.50. I did actually raise it up to $22. That's still not the top end of what wages are for our competitors. I want to call them competitors, right? Our other agencies that are out there, but I do believe it's a pretty good equivalent. So I did raise it was almost $1.50 an hour, but that's what it is. If we're all competing for that same group of people, the private ambulance services, mainly down in that Milwaukee area, are paying $25, $30 plus an hour, and they're working $50, $60 an hour on overtime, because they're just so short across the state. I'm really hoping we're not going to get to that point, right? But we are truly very dependent on our LTE pool to cover those 350 some days a year that our full-timers are on vacation and call in sick. I did leave, so with the sick time contribution cap, now that we aren't paying it out anymore, I had in there $10,000 a year to put back into that to help keep that well funded. I did increase that to $15,000 every year to put back in there. As we had our first payout to Kyle as he retired this year, as I've shared, as we kind of have an aging population of paramedics that we have, within, I think the last time I looked, we have 5 people who could retire today, and we would have to pay that out. We are funded with that, and none of them at least have shared that they have intentions of retiring today. But as we're going to start paying out in that, we need to continue to start putting money back into that, and hopefully not in one big chunk. So, and that's what I listed in there. Within at least in 10 years, we will see a 50% increase or 50% replacement of our staff within 10 years. Other things we listed in there that we've talked about: fuel, oil, repair parts, replacement costs, medical supplies, have all gone up significantly. As when we talked a few months ago about the EMTs, the volunteers and the new LTEs, that personnel recruitment line was pretty low. Every time we bring one of them on board, we have to buy uniforms, we have to send them for drug testing and physical agility. So that stuff's starting to add up as we start to increase our pool, and we've overspent that for the last few years. So up that personnel recruitment just for the cost of bringing new people on. Going back and looking historical, radio equipment, that line was raised just because the amount we're spending on radio equipment has gone up. Medical equipment actually went, the purchase of medical equipment actually went down because of the expenditure last year that we used to replace our medication vaults and put them on a cloud-based system. So that was a one-time expenditure that was taken away then for this budget year. As far as medical maintenance went, we actually, you're going to see there's a pretty significant increase in our medical maintenance. Again, pretty much as we, the double-edged sword is as we get more stuff breaks and needs to be to get maintenance right. It's great to get ventilators, and they're still under their original preventive maintenance contract, but I think next year half of those will be out. Every time we pick up a new cot or an auto load that comes with that original preventive maintenance, and then we have to start paying for it. We did have it was essentially a catastrophic failure of the hydraulic system on one of our cots this year, to the tune of about a $6,000 repair. Never really dawned on me at the time that, I can have all the backup ambulances I want. If I don't have a cot to put in it, that ambulance is out of service. Fortunately, when we sold the ambulance last fall, we kept the cot with intentions of selling it, and we just never did. So we actually did have a cot to throw in that ambulance, fortunately, but it has since been repaired. But what we did to investigate then is there actually is a preventative maintenance contract that will come with all of our on all of our equipment, and we look at what we're spending on preventative maintenance and parts, and taking into consideration that catastrophic failure. It's going to be easier now to actually help budget that medical equipment maintenance because we locked into a 3-year contract. So we aren't going to see an increase in those costs over the 3 years, and that is stretchers have bumper to bumper, but it's a bumper to bumper as well as all the auto loads in the ambulances. So that went up a little bit. Computer support went up. We took out, every 5 years, we replace the workstations. That moves through the Fitch-Rona station, the 2 Fitchburg stations, the admin computers, and the tablets in the ambulances. So every 5 years, we replace 3 computers at each one of those stations, plus the ambulances. We took that out last year to help reduce some of the cost. I think we are actually sitting pretty good with our computers. That went back in for next year to help to go back to that 5-year cycle. Labor contract fees. So that's part of that assigned fund, that $24,000 that's sitting in the investment account. That sits there so that we don't have that spike every 3 to 4 years when we do contract negotiations. Fortunately, we'll knock on wood again, we haven't had to use the whole $24,000. 3 years ago, it came in, I think, about 12. But we don't know what that will cost this year, but we will expend that assigned fund this year. So we will have to start putting money into it next year to build that back up for the next contract negotiation. Talked about the fire intern program and putting those funds back in there. And then the last thing we did was I put in a line item for the reserve funding. So I put $10,000 in there for next year. If you look, I did the math based on the audit presentation that you just got from Brent. So if we looked at 2021, we were at 13% for a reserve. I did the math right, so to get up to a 15%, there was about a $75,000 disparity between the 13 and the 15%. If we, hearing from the auditors, right, saying that we're actually sitting in a pretty solid space financially, unlike municipalities when they kind of get those big incomes, we are fortunate enough we get, that reoccurring kind of this steady stream of income over the course of a year. To me, to take an approach of about a 5-year process to get that back up to 15%, obviously we're evaluating it every year. If we put $10,000 to $15,000 in, the true number is $15,000 in there every year for the next 5 years, we will be at that 15%. So I put $10,000 in there, essentially based on that projection of having a pretty significant overage in run income this year. It's not going up to the complete $15,000. We can see what happens with run income over the next couple of years. Again, every budget year looking, and once we hit that 15%, we can either take that back out or we can continue to put that money back in there until we hit 25% and then take it back out. But you'll see that in there. We talked back and forth whether to go to 10 or 15. I put in there 10. So you can tell me, again, this is part of the discussion here of leave it in, take it out, in an overall budget system. We need to, I put it in there as a priority. I think it needs to be a priority. What that does then is, let me pop this up here to share. What that does then is it looks like this. So this is the sheet you're used to seeing. You'll see our 2022. Move that out of there. Oops, let me get that out of there. What you'll see here then, this is what the 2022 budget line item was. This is the proposal for 2023. So even with that little bit of an increase in operational, a 3% increase based on last year, if you remember right, when my math error for the last couple of years, finally fixing it for last year brought that number back down. So this is truly, if we look at historical run income, it truly is only about a 3% increase over where we would have been had we not brought it so suddenly down last year. So because it went significantly lower last year, to bring it back up to where it is, it's about an 8% increase. So that number is double checked against historical perspective as probably a reality of what we can expect in run income next year. We dropped down the interest income just a little bit because we're not getting any interest. Nobody's getting any interest. That contracted events, that's where you'll see we added that $20,000 in there. Wages and salaries, again, this wages and salaries is an estimate of what we can expect for contract negotiations, plus as we talked about in the committees for the non-represented employees of what we can anticipate for that increase as well. Then it does all of the based on scheduled overtime or events, the known and unknown events, historical spending on sick time. Because wages go up, retirement goes up. The WRS contribution went up one point. You remember, Michelle? Okay. WRS contribution. I actually have it. It went up 1 point. You sent it to me. 1.2. So WRS contribution alone went up 1.2%, plus an increase in wages will affect retirement. Plus we still have 4 LTEs who are putting in enough hours to actually get into state retirement. So that actually did go up quite a bit. The more hours we work, the more people we have on board, the higher our workers' comp goes. Pretty significant increases in fuel, oil, labor, repair parts, and medical equipment. You'll see the big increase. I mean, it says 110%, but it went up by $1,000 in personnel that's what I talked about, uniform and drug testing. Big increase in the computer support line by putting those back in to replace those computers. The decrease in medical equipment offset by the increase in the medical equipment maintenance, the medical maintenance side of things. That's the cots and auto loads. You'll see the increase in the paramedic intern. It's a 0% because it went from zero to back that solid $9,000. That will pay for half of the tuition for 2 interns, or a little bit less than half plus books and other supplies and testing for 3, based on how many applicants we have. And then you'll see the $10,000 in there for the reserve funding. So the overall budget actually did go up 8.9%. That was 25% in normal operations and only about 6.4% for salary stuff. It is offset by an increase in run revenue by about 9%. So this is what it ultimately does for, let's zoom out just a little bit. This is what the ultimate impact is on the municipalities. So you see there's a pretty significant, right, if we go back and look at that, the historical perspective of the city of Fitch-Rona, where the Department of Revenue screwed up the equalized value 2 years ago and then gave them the credit for the screw up last year. So this brings them back to post screw up, pre-screw up numbers. So there's kind of that artificial but real increase in there. Why they see such a significant increase this year is because they saw the significant decrease last year. These are based on the other component, or always moving part to the equalized value. These estimates are based on the 2021 equalized value numbers. of 50% for the city of Fitchburg, 45% for the city of Verona, and roughly 5% for the town of Verona. There's a point something that makes a difference in each one of them. So I returned these to the 2021 levels because last year's levels were so skewed based on equalized value. The true equalized value numbers I think are usually come in about August 1st. So within a couple weeks, we'll actually get those real numbers and readjust these so that those will change. Those percentages will change, probably not significantly, but I did reach out to both Misty, the finance director for Fitchburg, and Brian, the finance director for the city of Verona, said, what do you anticipate happening now that equalized value is going to go back to whatever it's supposed to be? And essentially they both said not a clue. So this is just a rough estimate based on 45, 5, and 50%. Again, it will change. I would suspect city of Fitchburg still had some pretty significant growth last year. It's probably going to creep up a little bit, and comparatively for the city of Verona will probably creep down a little bit, and the town always just kind of hovers right there at 5%. What are your, somebody's got it. Can you make it smaller to see that? Yeah.
I was just wondering if you can make it smaller. With our pictures on the right, we couldn't see the column that says there. Thank you.
Yep. Any questions? I did email out the list of substantial changes to you. The priorities I just sent out to you with that group, I think that was today, or it was probably yesterday, to take a look at. Yes.
With what we heard about the reserve funding from the auditor, we got about a $40,000 revenue over expenses. Why not make the reserve funding $15,000 instead of just 10 and try to get it done?
I originally did have it in there as 15, and as I tried to look at different things, right, in big picture stuff, $5,000 and 3.6 million was
not much.
Nothing.
Yeah.
I absolutely can. I think it'll probably change it by a 100%. If that's a recommendation, I can do that.
At the end of the year, if we have a good budget year and we have an excess amount of money, can you just put more money into the reserve fund, or?
So the reserve fund doesn't, it exists based on the math of everything. So we actually don't have like a savings account that said, hi, I'm the reserve.
Yeah, okay.
There's, nothing has that name to it. We do have, like at our Oak Bank account, we do have a CD with, I think it's 150, I think it's listed in there with $150,000 in it. It's kind of the reserve. It's just sitting there. Hopefully I never have to tap into it. And at one point it earned better interest than everything else. It doesn't anymore. But yes, I mean, putting another $5,000 in there would, at the end of the year, right, should we not have an issue, the reserve will go up. The auditors will say, yep, this is what everything looks like. This is what you end up with your unassigned balance. Your reserve goes up.
So we'll do it anyway, basically.
So it would because we have line items, yes, the reserve would go up by 5,000. Or if it's over, then we look at it in the 2020. We should have our audit before we look at next year's budget. So we end up with, we really do have I think the projected is almost $150,000 over in budgeted run income for 2022. If it turns out we really see that amount at the end of the year, and when we look at the actual ending 2022, and that number was way over budget, and we end up with that in our in that technical reserve count, before we do this next year, we will have that number that says your reserve is at 20%, and we can take it out. We can take that whole line item out.
I see, yeah. Okay, so I'll withdraw the request, it doesn't matter.
Okay. It's something we could
Patrick, Patrick, I had a quick question. The sick leave liability. I mean, that's in a savings account. What happens when somebody retires? How is that money actually dispensed?
So the money sits in I think it's a CD or an investment account that we can access once a year at that WISC account. So like when Kyle retired this year, we figure out what we owe him. That money is paid out into their post-retirement healthcare account. It's an investment firm. So we make that deposit into their HRA account. When our WISC account, where that $250,000 is sitting, comes due in November, I think it is, we will actually pull out of that account what we paid to him and put it back in the general operating fund. So essentially, we're using that reserve fund to kind of prepay him to pull it out 6 months later. So the money will come from the assigned fund by the end of the year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I kind of understand it. What if somebody doesn't use all the sick leave liability for whatever reason? Does that money come back to us then?
Yes. Yep.
Does that, we don't have much of a history with that, do we? So we don't really know.
So there are 1,296 is what the contract says they can carry over in sick time. So I actually know the final sick balance of every employee we have at the end of the year. I know they earn 144 hours a year based on how many they earn every month. So I know exactly which employees are going to go over that 1,296. I make an assumption that none of them are ever going to call in sick, right? And at the end of the year, I'm going to have to pay out 144 hours of time to those we currently have. Well, now with Kyle gone, we currently have 4 employees who I know will be over 144 hours times whatever their salary is. That's what determines that sick time over cap, plus the $15,000 that we're going to put into that HRA account. Now, Dale, who's been here for 24 years, right, he's at that cap. If Dale calls in sick, 8 days, 5 days, something like that. Dale calls in sick one day, he's gonna pull 24 hours out of that 144 hours. I'm not gonna pay him for those 24 hours. That money, yes, just stays in the general fund. But you can't plan on it. So we plan on paying every one of those people their sick time at the end of the year. If they don't use it, yes, it just stays in the fund. It stays with us. But it stays in our general operating fund. It doesn't go into that WISC account.
Okay, I guess maybe I'll talk to you sometime about, I don't quite understand how we're paying. The money is essentially to buy medical insurance, right?
Yes.
Health insurance,
So
dental insurance.
Yes, I probably am in error when I say we pay them. We don't pay them. We put that money in that HRA. It's just earned to them. So those 4 employees that we currently have at the end of the year, we'll say Dale, right? Dale has 144 hours of sick time, whatever our policy says. I think we pay it out at 50% of his current salary. On January 1st, I pull whatever's 1,296, which is 144 hours. Half of that at his current salary gets paid into his HRA. And he will get that every year until he leaves here, as long as he's over the cap. If he uses all 8 days, he gets nothing. If he doesn't use any days, we pay him what that is accordingly. So that'll be into that, so that's into that post-retirement healthcare. They cannot touch that until they technically retire. Per the state, Wisconsin state retirement definition of retirement. When Dale finally does retire, we will pay the whole $1,296 out at his wage into that same account.
Right, and if he doesn't use all that, then it comes back to us. I guess that's what I was trying to get at.
When he retires, he gets paid out.
Say unfortunately he would die before he used all the money. His significant other would.
It is actually paid out to a beneficiary. It is actually defined in our guidelines about how that money.
So it's much different than our process is much different in what state retirement system works. That's what I'm trying to get at. Okay.
Yeah.
That's enough. Thanks.
If you get more questions, I can kind of show you. Probably see it on paper, but a little bit easier, and then go through the policy.
Okay. What's the next steps on the budget? Just for a time frame for everybody.
If you don't have any more questions, or if you don't want to mull it over, I am looking for an approval. At least a draft version is due to Fitchburg next week.
Okay. So are there any more questions? Changes anybody wants? If not, we could ask for a motion to submit the draft, because it's still a draft, right?
Yeah, I guess I tag it as a proposal because it is still subject to the equal. The only thing that would change in here, as of this moment in time, because we won't be done with contract negotiations by the time this is due, but we will change equalized value because those will come out before it enters it kind of starts down the pathway of both municipalities. The only thing that will change in here, the numbers won't change, right? It'll still 3.661436 will not change. What will change is the apportionments based on equalized value.
Yeah, yep.
So looking
So
for,
how do you want us to make the motion?
you are looking to approve the budget as proposal as presented, subject to the 2022 equalized value numbers.
Okay, I won't repeat that, but everybody. So is there a motion to,
I'll move
Approve
to approve the proposed budget, Lonsdorf.
I'll second.
Second, Luganville.
thank you, all in favor, signify by saying aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? If not, the proposed budget is approved for submittal to the municipalities.
And then per our intergovernmental agreement, it now enters the process of the municipal budget process. So any of those three municipalities can always kick it back. So then it will come back to this, will come back to this body. It could come back to this body for discussion. If anybody, any of the council members or all their supervisor, I guess, need any more information about this to share at the council meetings, let me know what you need. Otherwise, yeah, this will go to the city of Fitchburg. I think the 26th is when it is due. And then I don't recall, I think the 2nd of August is when I think it goes to the city of Verona. And then I will send it, usually at the same time I send it to the city of Verona, I'll send it to the town. If I know I have a scheduled budget presentation to the finance committee already scheduled in Fitchburg as well as the city of Verona. The town of Verona, I usually just come talk to them. So if you want to bring it back to that group, I'm more than happy to come out and present it to the town of Verona. It's a little less formal than it is for the two cities. Or if you want to just go back and say, yeah, it looks fine, I'm fine with that too.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Let's move on to item number 9, review and approval of the Gatsby 54 fund balance.
Missed checks. I do have a copy of the checks if anybody needs to see this. It did get emailed
Yeah,
out.
I missed that one. Yep, okay. Let's back up to number 8, accounts payable checks. Any questions for the chief? If not, a motion to approve the accounts payable checks as submitted by Chief Anderson.
Motion to approve, Johnson.
Second.
Second by Roberts.
Thank you. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Hearing none, the accounts payable checks as submitted are approved. Then we can move on to, I was ahead of myself, review and approval of the Gatsby 54 fund balances.
Sure, it's the usual thing you see every month, just with updated numbers. Brent from Johnson Block shared a little bit where the history of those numbers comes from. So it's the same thing you would have seen in that audit there, right? $63,000 is non-expendable for inventory. Like, I can't pay bills with bags of saline. No, we may come to that fairly soon. But that and the prepaid expenses, those are like the things we pay for medical direction, right? Things that we also can't bargain for being paid. So the only thing you'll see is the FAP funding that is different in there. The sick leave didn't change in the contract negotiation. So really the only number that really changes is FAP if we spend anything from it. The reason that number is high as of today, right? The FAP funding is in there. So as of today's date, the FAP funding is higher than what you see in the report. That's it. Formality.
Okay, thank you. Anybody got questions? If not, a motion to approve the Gatsby 54 is submitted.
I'll make the motion to approve the Gatsby as submitted.
A second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? The Gatsby 54 funds as submitted are approved on July 21st, today. Thank you. Anybody have any other business they want to bring up? Hearing none. Next meeting will be August 18th. Same place. Hopefully I'll make that one in person. My legs should be healed by then. A motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor of adjourning, signify by saying aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.